Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to a new episode of Cloudicorns. My name is Lucia Subatin, and I'm here today with Blessing. Hi, Blessing.
Hi, Lucia. I'm so glad to be on here with you today. And as always, love the unicorn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Diego couldn't join us today because he came down with something like a flu. So we decided to record it anyways and air. But thank you so much, Blessing, for joining us today. I'm super excited for this episode. For people in the audience, Blessing is to thank or blame for my joining Google partially because she was the hiring manager of my process when I first joined Google. And she's an awesome person. She's great to work with. So I wanted to invite her to our podcast and talk a little bit about what being a manager at Google looks like. So yeah, let's start with a little bit of your background and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, no, first off, I just need to respond to that comment. You were an amazing hire. I remember reviewing the interview feedback when we hired you, and someone said you would be dumb not to hire her. So, absolutely, absolutely, great that you joined. A little bit about myself, what I do right now. I am responsible for what is called delivery management on our professional services team. So basically, when customers, come to Google Cloud and they want to use our platform and our products, our professional services team is kind of the technical partner that comes alongside them and helps them with implementation, technical advisory, the art of the possible, recommendations, and things like that. My team leads the delivery governance of those, but my background has always been in tech. And when I was much younger, my parents had a dream that I would end up in the legal industry. They wanted me to be a lawyer. It was so weird because I was always talking as a kid. And but then when I was 11, a relative bought me a book on robotics, and I fell in love right away. Like the fact that I could program robots to do things, and for me, kind of coding became an escape from the world. And that was the point. I was like, I absolutely have to do computer science. And my mom was like, "What's that? We don't even have a computer." But that was kind of like when I made my decision. I was going to go into STEM, I was going to go into tech, and I stayed through to that. I started out as a developer building front end applications for a small bank back home, and I've kind of done a lot of different roles since. I've done a few different things actually, but always in tech, always around tech. I got hired at Google 3+ years ago, and so far I'm liking it. So
Well, that's
that's how I got here.
that's good to know, and yeah, thank you for sharing the background. I didn't know about the robotics thing. I love that. I love that.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so you started as a front-end developer, and somehow you ended up being a manager at Google. Did you join Google wanting to be a manager, or it just happened?
It just happened. So when I back in the industry, I had managed teams in the past. So let me kind of like break out my background a little bit. I started as a developer on a team of developers, and then I kind of got promoted into a client, we called it client engagement role. And basically in that role, I was responsible for certain business units, and I was the liaison to the dev team. Basically, our business folks didn't like talking to developers. So like, I don't understand what they're saying. I don't understand why this is not ready, and it created problems with our CIO. And so our CIO created this role, and I understood what the devs were talking about. I understood what the business needed, and I was kind of like a translator. That was what I was. But I was also kind of relationship manager, and I was also responsible for helping the business figure out how to best maximize IT. And so they're not asking for things that were unreasonable or didn't make sense or didn't work within our IT strategy. And I did that for a few years, but then the team expanded and I stepped into a management role. And so I was managing a team of developers, a team of business analysts, and some front desk support folks. That was my very first experience managing a team. This was in the 2000s. And so when I got hired at Google, I didn't get hired as a manager. I got hired as an engagement manager. And so similar role to what I was doing in the bank, I was responsible for clients who or customers who want to use professional services and just kind of figuring out what that looked like, figuring out the scope, figuring out if it made sense, figuring out resources and project planning. But then our team in Canada was growing, and my manager at the time had an open requisition for a new manager to be responsible for the consultants on the team. And he and I were chatting, and he knew he asked me if I'd managed a team before. I said yes. We talked a little bit about that, and he said, I think you'll be a good fit for this opportunity. I think you should go for it. I was 6 months at Google. There was no way I was going to apply for a manager role. But with his encouragement, I went ahead and I applied, and that's how I transitioned from an IC to a manager.
Well, we thank that person because definitely an amazing manager. Everybody loves her, including myself. It's a great opportunity to work with Blessing. So my next question is from your side or your perspective, what is it like to actually be a manager at Google?
It is unlike anything that I've ever experienced. It is the most humbling thing, and I think that being a manager at Google actually challenges you to be a much better person, honestly. So Google creates a very high bar for folks who are managers at Google. One of the things that, when we did manager orientation about 3 years ago was the Googlers on your team experience Google through you. Our culture is great. We do all these things as a company, but you are the conduit through which your team experiences the larger entity that is Google or Alphabet. And so the quality of your leadership skills really makes or mars the experience of the Googlers on your team. And I think that's a massive responsibility, right? One of the things, we're encouraged not to do is the company hires some of the smartest people in the industry. So obviously, a lot of times you would have people on your team that are smarter than you. One of the things I always said to you, Lucia, was, I know you're smarter, you know this stuff way better than I do. I trust your judgment and this, go for it, right? And so that's really creating an enabling environment for your team to thrive and do what they do really well. Micromanagement is hugely frowned upon. We trust, we create an environment of trust. As a manager, I believe that my core responsibility is removing blockers from my team so they can just go and be rock stars. That's my job. And so like if I'm talking to you and you're having a good day, I feel like I'm having a good day, right? That's the thing there. But then it really, really, tests your leadership skills, like your ability to have difficult conversations, your ability to be self-aware, to be able to have crucial conversations, to read body language, to understand what is being said versus what's not being said, to be able to be the bad guy and say no to protect your team, to be a bit of a crap umbrella, and put the well-being of your team first. And so all of these things challenge you as a person to just be a better human being, right? It's not all about you. It's not all about your personal ambitions and what you want. It's really about the greater good and the morale of the team and the morale of the individuals on the team. So it is, you know, it is interesting. I personally have grown a lot from being a manager. And, when I hear some of the feedback from my team about, oh, it was so great to work with you, I'm like, that's great. That it shows that the hard work is paying off. So I'm really excited about it. But for those who are wondering what managers at Google do, managers also have day jobs. Your job is not just managing a team. So you have personal accountability, you have your own work that you need to do. We're like player coaches. So we play as well, but we also coach. That's the management methodology, at least for frontline managers.
Yes, and that of course matches my experience. Like all of the managers I've had are highly skilled as well. This what you were talking about being an umbrella and being able to say no, that's something that I in particular admire and think that it's a great skill to have. And yeah, it sounds like you're making an impact, and you see that you're making an impact. So that's one of the good things, I guess, of being a manager at Google. What do you think are the other good things of being a manager at Google?
Um, I think that you get a front row seat to working with some of the brightest people you probably would ever get a chance to work with. I think that is one of the better things. It's not possible for you to just kind of rest on your oars and go, oh well, I'm great, so that's it, I'm good. You have to kind of give your team the chance to really grow, but then also an opportunity to learn from your team, right? So, working with people that are smart as the folks that get hired at Google, I think there's a lot of cross-pollination of intelligence and ideas. And so, as a person, you're coming to the table with the things that you have, your experience and your background, but you also need to make room to receive that back from your team as well. And so, the synergy that creates is so it's part of what Sundar talks about when he talks about walking the halls and water cooler conversations. That's how we innovate, right? That cross pollination of ideas is what makes some of the teams at Google really as great as they are. And that you know we've created some very, very amazing things over the last few years that I'm personally proud of. But I never wrote a line of code, so it's really my team doing all the work. But you do get a front row seat to some really, really amazing experiences. I think that is another really cool thing.
And I guess from an individual contributor perspective, I feel that Google does a great job at training and putting training opportunities. As an individual contributor, this cross pollination that you're mentioning, even with this COVID thing that doesn't quite allow us to just go around the office and meet people randomly, it has put a little bit of a barrier there. Even then, we have virtual spaces for that. Is there such a thing
Yeah.
for managers as well?
Yes, we have a manager hub. We have manager nudges, which is like a very, very, I love the way we do that. It's a very personal kind of, it's not a newsletter, it's a nudge really. You get an email that goes, Dear manager, we know you're working really hard. Here are some things to help you be more productive, right? So there's a ton of assets, there's a ton of support, there's a lot of investment in like short mini MBAs, like 3-month courses. There's book recommendations. There's links to courses from external parties, consultancy firms that do leadership and change management and conflict management and negotiation, those kinds of trainings that you need as a manager. There's a ton of investment. You need to make the time to invest in yourself, in improving your skills. So there's that as well. There's also a huge focus on career development. So career coaching your team, and then thinking about your own development as a manager. A performance management cycle creates a 360-degree view of the work that you're doing. Again, this is something that is very, very interesting at Google. During performance reviews, we review ourselves as managers, our team reviews us as managers, and our manager reviews us as managers, and our peers review us as well. And so you're getting all of these perspectives, and if you really are self-aware and just kind of open to receiving the feedback, looking at it objectively, following up where you need to, asking good questions, it really, really pushes you to be, a better, version of yourself. Again, bear in mind, a lot of the people that are hired at Google are really smart, really type A, personalities, really driven. And so our performance management framework and all of these assets and material and training content really is really just there to help accelerate or refine, what you already, typically have in
I
your.
have to say, I'm not a fan of the perf process. I think I understand the benefits. I understand why it is the way it is, and I understand the outcomes and how it for people in the audience, the performance assessment process, shortly called perf, happens twice a year, but it feels like it happens every month. It's everybody's chance to
Yes.
give visibility to the broader groups about what you're doing, what your contributions were as an individual, and to also get measured against other individuals in the same role or with the same responsibilities. This is a time-consuming process, I would say. If it's time-consuming for individual contributors,
It
I
is.
understand that for managers it's even more time-consuming because we do this cross the peer reviews, and you get like a lot of requests coming in like, can you review my work because you have been working with me? So it's also helping other people and giving them feedback, right? Like the feedback that I've gotten through perf.
Hmm.
um, Luckily, as you say, if you have self-awareness, it doesn't necessarily surprise you, but it's a good time to get reflection to
Hmm.
make sure you have like a holistic view. So that's very interesting. But the process in itself is very time
Yeah,
consuming, which leads me to what are
it is.
negative aspects of being a manager at Google.
I think the biggest one is there is an overestimation of how powerful you are as a manager. I think people see, oh, I manage a team of X, and like, oh, wow, you must be in all the rooms where all the decisions are being made. And so, of course, you have all the answers about, this new policy that I don't agree with, or this decision to return to the office in the middle of winter, or, whatever other decision. And one of the things I always start my team meetings with is I don't have all the answers. Just put it on the table. I will share with you what I know. I will share with you my understanding of the rationale for this decision, and then let's talk about how we can make this work for us as a team, right? So there's, I think, an absolute overestimation of how much power frontline managers have. And I'm the first person to put my hand up and say, yeah, that decision was made way above my pay grade. I'm not in I'm not in those rooms. That's the first thing. The other thing is, I wouldn't say it's a negative, but it is a challenge for sure. Um, I feel like I don't own my calendar. And the reason I say this is, remember I talked about managers also have their accountabilities, the whole player coach model. So starting my day, I have my nice to-do list here of things that I want to do today. Um, but someone on my team is having a crisis and they ping me, Blessing, do you have 5 minutes to chat? It's never 5 minutes.
I know.
It's usually around 30 minutes. And I'm like, of course I have 5 minutes for you. This is obviously important. And then that just kind of like it could upend my entire calendar for the day, for the week, depending on what it is, right? And so there's some weeks that I feel like, oh, I set out to do so many things this week, but I got pulled into this escalation, or someone on my team was having a crisis. And this got really, really bad, I think, when the pandemic hit, because everyone on my team was impacted differently. Some people have young families, some people lived alone, some people really hated working virtually, some people don't like being on camera for, personal reasons. And so as a manager, you're kind of like trying to provide all the support that's needed to all of these things and do your job, which is not going to go away because you manage a team. So I personally have an improvement, area to really get really good at protecting my calendar or creating
Mhm.
focus time when I can do heads down work without being interrupted, but then create time so that my team continues to know that I'm, available to them. So that's the other thing that's not super great.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. I sometimes feel I don't know my calendar myself, and even the focus times is like, well, I set a meeting here, like, but that's the focus time. I need time to actually do my stuff. So yeah, I hear you. It's
Yeah.
one of the things that gets challenging. I guess with COVID and people being virtual, that became more of a challenge. As you say, there's a lot of metadata and context that we're missing. So something that if you were
Yes.
like in person, you would see the context, you would see the body language, as you were saying. There's a lot of there that we're missing. So it takes even more time to communicate around. So that's a thing as well. One thing that people ask me a lot, and I guess we can cover, is what would you recommend to somebody applying at Google?
Hmm, I get that one a lot. Um, the first thing I would say is apply to roles that you know you're qualified for. Read the job description, make sure you understand what the rec is. So, what are they looking for? And if you have relationships at Google and you're not quite sure what a JD is talking about, ask questions. And then that actually leads to the second thing. So, like 1A, 1B, if you don't get, you know, called for a phone screen or an interview, don't take it personally. I think in my experience, the people that I have kind of chatted with me about, well, I applied to Google and no one, called me back. And I obviously they're wrong because, I'm great. And I'm like, I believe you are great. Um, but I also believe that if you weren't called back, there's a valid, objective reason for that. So don't take it personally. Read through the rec, read through your resume, and kind of figure out what might have gone wrong. And if you really, really want to work at Google, don't let that stop you. Look for another role that's within your skill set that you feel comfortable, that you can excel at, because the bar at Google is very high. And then, keep applying and build relationships. So attend events that, are being run by Google, or, events that, Googlers are going to be present. Try to build kind of network, try to understand how the company works. You might get some insights, especially if you can find people that work on teams that you're intending to work on. You might get insights that can help you increase your chances of success.
That sounds like great advice. I would totally second that. And you mentioned something about the process being objective, which leads me to asking about diversity and inclusion. So this is something that is very near and dear as a topic to me, and I know that a lot of us at Google are advocates for getting a broader talent pool beyond anything that may get in the way, such as bias, which unfortunately something sometimes happens. So what do
Yeah.
you feel that Google does right? And what do you feel that Google gets wrong or we still need to work on to be more inclusive?
I think that when it comes to DEI, one of the things, in my opinion, that Google does really well is there's a lot of the right intent from the very, very top. I think Suna is very, very clear about the kind of world we are creating, because tech companies, we're we have so much power today, very different from political power, obviously, but in terms of the reach of our products and the reach of our services and the way other companies and other businesses look to some of these really, really large technology companies. And I remember when we were talking about, working from home and RT and return to the office. I'm trying not to use any acronyms. A lot of people were like, oh, and Google, Google CEO said this, or and Google implemented this policy. We're leading the charge and telling everyone what a modern workplace should look like and what a good culture should be like. And so I think that's a huge responsibility. And Google, I think, takes that responsibility very seriously. So there's a lot of care when we think about DEI and when we review the data about, the numbers that don't look quite great. But then there's also a lot of, transparency in communicating how we're doing. A lot of companies publish, well, we would like to do X and Y in diversity, but Google publishes an annual diversity report. And sometimes the report isn't flattering. In fact, a lot of times it's not flattering. It shows areas where we're struggling, and groups that are not as well represented as they should be, and groups where we're having high rates of attrition, and it's out there in the public for everyone to read. And so that for me, I think is a great thing. I think it's really, really, it really speaks to um, ethics and integrity and a willingness to improve because when you share that kind of information, people can hold you accountable to improving those numbers. I think that another thing that we do really well in DEI is creating processes. Now, this is not perfect. I will preface this by saying that it's not perfect, but there are a lot of processes and avenues for people in, you know, historically underrepresented groups to ask for help. So we talked about perf a few minutes ago. If you feel like the performance process is biased towards you, there's a way to kind of come forward and ask for, a more objective review. One of the reasons why we have all this kind of like multi-faceted feedback mechanism is so that one person is not determining your career. Your manager is not just saying, Blessing, I don't like you, you're not going to go forward. There's feedback from your manager, but that's also weighted against feedback from your peers and feedback from your team. And so that creates a way for things to be a lot more objective than just, one-sided. I think that's also something that we do really well. But in terms of things that we could do better, I think one of the big things is there's a huge burden, and I don't think this is intentional. I think it just happens that way on the people that are most impacted by, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, leading the charge on changing those things. And in some cases, these people are not senior enough within the organization. They don't have access to the right um, our rooms to influence policy. If you look at our employee resource groups, our ERGs, they're all being led by people of color, or, women, or, people in specific groups. And I think that's great for community. So it's good to have people that look like you or people who share similar interests to be part of a community or a sub community within Google. But when it comes to oh, well, we really should be doing more for this group of people. I think that having the people in that group being the ones fighting for themselves, it's not a great experience. So having more executive sponsors kind of be allies and own specific initiatives, I think would be helpful. Um, Another thing that we do really well is we put our money where our mouth is. A lot of our, employee resource groups, it's not, again, perfect and it's not by any means enough, but, there's, budget for us to invest in initiatives that we care about or, you know, small businesses or companies in our communities that support, organizations that help, with, for example, getting Black talent. There's partnerships that we're exploring. All of those things are, I think, really helpful in moving the needle. I would like to see more transparency internally on reporting the actual numbers of things like number of promotions in certain groups or attrition rates in certain groups. Like I personally would want to see year on year how many, you know, women are getting promoted in specific parts of the organization, or how many Black women are getting promoted, or, you know, on and on and on. Slice and dice the pie any way you like it. I would like to see a bit more um, there. But then I also understand that there's concerns around, self-reporting that information, and it's very sensitive. So it's a difficult problem to solve. But those are some of the things that I think the company is doing well, and some things that I think we could
Hopefully,
do better.
somebody hears this and is not, as you say, the labor or the burden is going back to the groups that are actually suffering or feeling the consequences of the bias, right? Which, yeah, as you say, it shouldn't be um, always responsible. It shouldn't be the responsibility of those who are already dealing with the emotional labor of all of these consequences as well, like being marginalized, and like there's a lot going
Yeah.
on that those who are not in this kind of group do not feel or deal with. So it's also more difficult for them to understand, and it takes some inner
Yeah.
work on their side to be empathic and empathetic about what's
Mhm.
going on with their peers as well. So yeah, hopefully we the visibility.
I think emotional burden is the word. It is a huge burden, and there's a lot of expectation. I remember in 2020, and I'm just gonna take 30 seconds, but in 2020 when the US was going through the incident with George Floyd, and I've had to have the talk with my son multiple times, but watching that on the news and watching the footage, like he had a very, very interesting reaction, and I had to kind of like talking through how he was feeling and how he was processing this. And but then I was also getting people at work ping me, oh, can you explain to me how this is
Yeah,
making you
no,
feel?
no.
I have a lot on my plate right now. And talking to you about how I feel is not one of them. And so there's a significant emotional burden that comes on as a person of color. And but I had to work with some of my peers on our Black Googler Network leadership team to say, oh well, we need to put together something for our leadership team. So I still had to think about, how do we put content out there so people in the community can come together and support each other and all of that. So I was thinking about myself and what was going on in my personal life, but also the community that I belong to at Google. And again, this is
Exactly.
not my day
Yeah, and as
job.
you
I'm
say,
not
the
paid to do
emotional the
this.
emotional burden adds. I mean, it's exhausting sometimes, right? So yeah. I'm glad you're part of the community, by the way. So thank you for all that work. And last but not least, I had an asterisk on the previous one. What would you recommend to people looking to get into tech in general, and specifically women and people of color?
I think that there's a huge misconception about tech for folks that didn't start out in tech, but they're curious about the industry and they want to get into the industry for whatever reason. There's a general idea, in my opinion, that you need to be a SWE to get into tech. And so I've had people ask me, actually had a conversation on this last week, Friday. Well, I want to get into tech. I'm trained as a lawyer, um, but I want to work in tech. Do I need to learn Java? I'm like, no, no, you don't need to learn Java. Um, Tech companies hire lawyers too. We have
Yes.
we have lawyer cats, like Lucia likes to say. So start with what skills you have that are transferable, right? Project management. We have project managers, we have program managers, we have lawyers, we have finance teams, we have analysts, we have HR people, we have, folks who do training. So we have content developers, we have survey and insights teams. We have a lot of functions that you wouldn't think of as tech roles. Now, there is a tech context, and I think that if you want to work in tech, you should understand the industry, understand what makes the industry tick, understand how we sell, because a lot of the things that we sell are intangible. So understand what those revenue models are, understand the business, but also understand what skill sets you have and where they're easily transferable. So what product areas or what teams or business units within tech companies can benefit from your current skill set, and then look for roles on those teams. And so you don't have to be, I think, a software developer unless obviously you have an interest and that's what you want to do, then absolutely go for it. But I don't think learning how to code is a prerequisite to every single tech job. That would be like the number one thing
That's
that
great.
I would say.
Any tips for women and or people of color?
I think for women, I know that I said earlier, um, apply for roles that you're qualified for. For women, I will add an additional nuance. Now, the data says a lot of the research has shown that women appear or tend to be more hesitant when they're not able to check every single bullet point on a job description. And so for women, yes, apply for roles that you're qualified for. But like if you don't have 10 out of 10, you have 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, go ahead and apply anyway. And have a plan going into the interview for the two bullet items that you're missing. And that may be either a plan to ramp up, a plan to, get a certification, whatever that is. Have a solid plan, have a plan that is reasonable, that you know you can do. So if you were to get the job today, in the first 100 days, in the first 3 months, I can absolutely knock this thing out of the park so that I can do my job well. Go ahead and apply for the role anyway. So I would say for people of color and women, make sure that you have the core capabilities that are required, but you don't need every single thing that's written on the job description for you to be able to
Yeah,
put your name in the hat. And oh, there's another thing I would add to that. Ask for feedback. If you go to an interview and you don't move forward, ask for feedback. Ask for what could have gone differently, what you can change, what you can, because that way there's again,
that makes
higher
a lot of
probability
sense.
you get it the
So
next time.
I could go on forever, all the way to tonight. So I'll um, let you go for now. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was great, great content, and thank you for all the insights and the time. Anything you want to say before we drop?
No, just thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I was really, really flattered when you said you wanted me to come on. So I hope some of this was useful. I just thank you for the
Awesome.
opportunity.
Thanks so much,
That's
Blessing, again
those will be my
for
closing
joining us.
points.
Thank you for everybody listening. We love your feedback. Please let us know what you liked. Please continue the feedback pieces coming. And thank you again for listening. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit that like button. Thank you.